Today we are speaking with Leyla Latypova, Tatar from Bashkorostan, journalist and analyst focusing on Russia's ethnic minorities and their rights. And I would like to start from the question, which is really interesting from the Western perspective. Many in the West don't really see this fight of ethnic minorities in Russia for their independence. And because of that, they don't really have hope for disintegration of Russia. Could you maybe outline some most important facts showcasing this struggle right now?
Yeah, of course. I wouldn't dub it as fight for independence. It's more of a, when we talk about decolonization, I guess to me and many other activists out there, it's first of all, returning back your rights, including the right for self-determination. But I think at the core of our struggle is really giving people the opportunity to decide for themselves, what kind of future they want, and exercise their democratic rights. Russia has 20 plus ethnic republics, that were mostly created during the Soviet Union. They were the autonomous socialist Soviet republics and had far less, autonomous rights than the other members of the Union. So that's kind of, where this struggle for statehood begins largely, because that was the first version of the state that was created. And it continues into the 21st century. Russia is on paper a federation. So some republics in the 1990s actually tried to exit Russia. So Tatarstan is a good example. It actually proclaimed sovereignty. Same with Chechnya, that fought two very violent wars for its independence with Russia. Moscow slowly but surely took away all the sovereign rights, largely centralized the country as much as it could. But, this strive for independence and for preservation of your identity and culture, it didn't go anywhere. I guess, when we talk about a potential collapse, as I said, it largely differs per Republic of Russia, what kind of demand people are looking for. Some places, especially, where the indigenous people are now an ethnic minority, people are more looking towards creating kind of a quote unquote real federation or even a confederate arrangement. Or some, of course, like Chechnya and the Chechen opposition, they're really looking to just get away, and establish their own independent state. So this varies case by case basis, and there are different demands. I guess another important thing to highlight here is the Western kind of view of Russia is so ethno and Moscow centric that's why, all of this also different spectrum of demands among different peoples of Russia, it also gets ignored often.
You mentioned this story of Tatarstan, which tried to claim its independence in the 90s. And we know quite well the story of Chechnya because there was a war. But how about the Tatarstan? Why it failed to actually attain this independence?
Yeah, well, it is linked to the story of Chechnya, in fact. Tatarstan not only proclaimed sovereignty, as they said then, but they also held a vote. It was a republic-wide vote, which actually was observed by the US Helsinki Commission, so it was up to all international standards. And over 60% of the population of the republic voted for, I don't remember the exact, how they formulated, but essentially, for independence from the Russian state. Tatarstan, of course, moved, to establish its own constitution, to reclaim the status of its majority, an indigenous Tatar language, etc., and etc. But it was eventually forced, as other republics, to sign a federal treaty with Moscow, meaning that Tatarstan would join, the Russian Federation. There are a lot of legends of why Tatarstan's political leadership has done so, but there are a lot of facts pointing to the fact that they were simply, blackmailed by Moscow because the war in Chechnya was already going on. And Moscow was planning, or almost nearly did, send troops to Tatarstan's borders. So, it was a very direct threat that if you don't sign the federal agreement, Russia will do what Russia does, will simply bomb the entire state.
You are yourself a Tatar, as far as I have read. And how would you outline the Tatar culture today after 500 of Moscow, 500 years of Moscow oppression? Can we say it's like a nation or an ethnic minority? How would you define it? What are the perspectives?
Tatars are definitely a nation. I guess Tatars are in a very unique position. You've mentioned Russia captured the Kazan Khanate in 1552, which was a terrible, siege of the proto-state of Tatarstan. But surprisingly, Tatars have managed, to preserve much of its culture. Not without, its losses. There have been a very kind of violent period of forced Christianization and forced Russification, of course. Forced Russification continues to this day. There is even an entire ethnic group that is now, considered to be separate. They're called Kryashin Tatars. And those are people, who adopted Christianity when Russians came, because there was a kind of a deal, that if you adopt Christianity, kind of take on Russian identity, more or less, you will have more opportunities, to conduct business activities. That's what Kazan Khanate used to be famous for, and preserve, your well-being. Most people didn't do that. There was, of course, kind of moving down the ranks for a very long time. Kazan, the beautiful capital of Tatarstan, is a very living and breathing example of that, because there is this little place which is now very popular among tourists. It's called kind of the Old Tatar Village, but it has a very sad history, because when Russians captured the city, all Tatars were forced to move to that particular part and were isolated from the city center, which was, of course, ruled by Russians. So, despite that, it's really a miracle that Tatars were able to preserve its identity. We are right now the largest indigenous ethnic group in Russia. There are over 6 million of Tatars living in Russia and 10 million all around the world, a lot of them in Central Asia, a lot of them in Europe, and in the United States as well. There is a very interesting history, and it's a very complex history of how this identity was preserved. There were deals done with the Imperial Russia back in the day, because Tatars were used in Russia's conquest of Central Asia, essentially, because, they were sent to convert people to Islam. That seemed like a more friendly religion. And because we share, mutually understandable languages with most countries in Central Asia, Tatars were kind of used as mercenaries, to make those, kind of convert those populations and adjust their views to have more favorable view of the Russian Empire. So that's, a complex part. It certainly perhaps allowed some people to preserve, parts of language and identity, but at what cost, So today, I would say Tatarstan remains within Russia, the most kind of sovereign part of this large country. It still has a lot of political autonomy, and most importantly, economic one, because Tatarstan is the only region that owns its own natural resources. All other natural resource companies are controlled by Moscow. For example, in neighboring Bashkorostan, the entire oil industry is Moscow's, essentially. But in Tatarstan, they control their assets, and all of the revenues, they mostly remain in the republic. But of course, again, like in the times past, Tatars pay kind of attacks to Moscow. So a lot of those revenues essentially go to Moscow, but now also, they go to fund the war, and we have to admit that sad reality.
So how would you summarize? Is this, let's say, cultural and to some extent political autonomy, is it increasing in Tatarstan or deteriorating?
That's a difficult question. I mean, Moscow does everything to erase it. Of course, since 2017, like in other republics, Tatar language is no longer mandatory in schools. So there was kind of this period of flourishing where more people, including ethnic Russians living in Tatarstan, they learned the state language, which is Tatar, and it was kind of revived. But now all of these kind of official avenues of preserving language and identity, they're essentially shut down. So everything of the Tatar culture that exists right now is all enthusiasts. We have a lot of kind of brands, including clothing one that revive ethnic identity, that try to make it popular. We have a lot of people creating, movies or books in Tatar language, again, trying, to make it more interesting, more cool. But unfortunately, right now it comes at a great cost. There are multiple laws, that you can suddenly violate, when you simply speak your own language. Yeah, so, it's a continuous struggle. It's difficult to say, but my perception is that when Tatars, especially in Tatarstan, saw the invasion of Ukraine, I think it reawakened kind of a lot of memories, and an identity in a way, because people really see the parallels. They see what Russia has done to them as well. And from my conversations, my journalistic work, I think the Tatar population in Tatarstan is majority, against the war. Of course, we have not seen ethnic, like any protests there, etc. But those are their completely different reasons, for why that didn't happen.
Let's move a little bit to the beginning, to this first question about independence. You said it's like, so as far as I understood, that people are not really seeking independence now, rather some rights protection and so on. So why so, if I understood correctly?
Yeah, I will here quote Sargalana Kondakova. She is a founder of Free Yakutia Foundation from the Republic of Sakha, and that's one of the most successful, and widely supported anti-war and indigenous rights movements. And had an interview with her once, and she told me, she was like, we can have a lot of hopes for independence, etc., but our work here starts with bringing back dignity to our people and ridding them of fear, meaning that living under the empire, people are simply scared of independence. There is a lot of kind of self-doubt. There is a lot of stigma, thinking that, no, Russians know it best. What are we going to do without them? We will just get, lost. Then there is constant, even from Russian liberal opposition, this constant rhetoric that no, regions can't survive on their own. They don't have nearly enough, economic power or resources, which is untrue, because all of the natural resources that Russia uses comes from the republics. So, I think there is no demand for independence right now, simply because we are at a very different stage. At first we need to kind of bring people back their dignity so they can realize that they can be independent, that is a possibility. But also, from my, research as a political scientist, a lot of nations, a lot of ethnic republics in Russia, they're landlocked. That is a problem. We have to be honest. And, I guess kind of what we've seen with Brexit in the today's, global economy, everything is so interconnected that indeed for economic reasons, a confederate arrangement, kind of a European Union, might be a better option for some of the republics. So yeah, many reasons, but essentially, we are just not yet there to start discussing independence with people.
Mhm. That's what actually some Russian opposition figures say, that Russia should become a confederation, a democracy, but still within its current borders. Would you personally agree with this statement?
I would not definitely agree with the shoot part because, as I said, I think republics do need to be granted their right to exit that confederation. And I do not think the preservation of current borders, especially what do we consider current borders? I don't know if they include occupied territories in that. I don't think that is a must, and I think it's just up to individual republics whether they want to stay or they want to go. I will say that, as I said, I believe that Chechnya has, I mean, every republic has the right to secede, and I'm sure people in Chechnya would go that route. I have a lot of question marks about Tatarstan because we do have this history of voting for independence. So it might as well be so that Tatarstan decides to secede as well.
Okay. And also maybe one personal question. As you told me, you are living in Europe currently. So is it dangerous for you to return to Russia, or no, you visit Russia, your region sometimes?
Yeah. Short answer is yes. And one of the reasons being, I mean, I'm a journalist, I openly speak out.
Sorry, yes, you mean it's dangerous, or
It's dangerous. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. It is dangerous. I'm a journalist. And I've openly spoke out against Russia's invasion of Ukraine multiple occasions. I do that every day. So that already qualifies me for an array, of Russia's censorship laws. But also, for anyone who is involved in indigenous activism and does anything with ethnic republics, the risks are just tenfold. Because in the republics, we have a much more sophisticated security apparatus. Everyone is being watched among the activists. I mean, it's smaller communities. It's way easier to identify people. But also, Russia, when it comes to indigenous activists, there are many more laws that can be applied to you. Most of us are being accused of extremism or terrorism. That comes true for Muslim communities in particular. Russia uses that tactic, I guess, to the fullest in occupied Crimea. But it also does it with other Muslims living in the country. You label people extremist, you claim that they have some, banned Islamic literature at their home, and that's it. That's where the case starts, and it's just as simple as that. You just need to identify as Muslim. In Bashkortostan, where I'm from, we are right now seeing the level of repression that is unprecedented anywhere in Russia since the Soviet times. We have over 100 people, political prisoners from Bashkortostan.
That's a lot. And is there any information what these people, so the conditions of their imprisonment, is there any torture about them? Do you know it?
Yeah, so these 100 political prisoners, they're all linked to the event that we've witnessed earlier this year. Bashkortostan had very large protests in support of imprisoned indigenous activist Fail Alsynov. There were thousands of people that joined, protesting his imprisonment. Most of those people were ethnic Bashkorts, so the indigenous population of the republic. It's important to highlight that those were not quote unquote, professional activists. It were very ordinary men and women, living in the villages who came out to protest and voice, their support for Fail, whose case was very much politicized. It was a personal order of the republic's head, who, thinks that he's his competition, etc. and etc. So after the protests, repressions followed. Now we know of around 100 people arrested, but also at least 2 men died. One died in custody, He was likely beaten to death by the police. His family, refuses to speak to journalists because they were likely threatened. And another man, he committed suicide while he was under investigation. And he left, this very ambiguous kind of death note, which basically referred to the fact that he can't handle the investigation against him anymore. And he thinks that will be best for his family, so they're not affiliated with the political prisoner. And I also want to highlight, that most of those people who are in prison, they are like fathers of 6 children, there are a lot of women among them, also elderly women. Conditions, we know that some say that it's okay. Most of them are either in Bashkortostan or neighboring regions. So they, for example, can, still pray. That is allowed because it's Muslim majority regions. But we know that Fail Alsinov, the famous activist, he was already badly beaten in prison, his lawyer announced. So, that's probably a fate that can await other political prisoners as well.
Mhm. Do you know the figure, maybe approximately, how many people from Bashkorostan, from Tatarstan, were drafted to Russian army and are fighting against Ukraine currently?
Yes, so I cannot say about the draft figures, but Bashkortostan right now is the leader when it comes to the number of deaths. That's the single region that has most number of deaths in the war. The Russian Defense Ministry doesn't reveal the true kind of recruitment numbers, but we can only guess that Bashkortostan is again one of the leaders. And there are several reasons for that. So when Russia had the open mobilization, we knew all of the horror stories from Bashkortostan, and Bashkortostan officials were targeting primarily rural areas of Bashkortostan, and that's where most indigenous ethnic Bashkirs live. Those are, remote villages. A lot of them don't have even proper internet connection. And, these the Ministry of Defense officials, they would literally storm houses, and take them in SWATs. So mobilization was likely, one of the worst in Bashkortostan. Perhaps worse was only in the Republic of Buryatia and Republic of Sakha. And then, from activists of other regions, we know that Russia continues to use kind of a lot of these coercion tactics, and that particularly works very well again in ethnic republics. People are being threatened, with past violations, like a speeding ticket. An official will come and say, well, you remember you had that speeding ticket. Well, now, we can open an entire criminal case against you. But, do enlist, everything will be forgiven. And, another thing, we would think, why not hire a lawyer, and stand up to that, etc. But again, in Bashkortostan, those things happen in very remote villages. And current situation with political prisoners shows us that most people living in those villages, they have no idea how to access legal help. A lot of them don't even speak Russian well. So right now, some Russian human rights groups, they provide lawyers who are bilingual, and who can translate from Bashkort. But in cases, when they're threatened, those people just sign the contract. They think they have nothing. They have no other choice. That is, not to kind of provide any excuses for them, but kind of show, what the reasoning is and why there are such large numbers. And of course, another reason, as in other ethnic republics, is the just the economic, absolute poverty, which is fascinating, because if you ask Russian, liberal political scientists, they will say, well, people in the republics, they enlist because they're poor. That's the way to make money. Indeed, the army pays salaries that are like tenfold of what you would usually earn in the republic. But I guess no one asks the question of why the republics, which provide most of natural resources, have to be so poor, and that's, of course, when we come to this kind of a typical colonial setup, you, of course, impoverish, those your colonized subjects, and then you take them to war. And it's, a tale as old as colonialism is.
Yeah, that's a typical Russian tactic, which Ukrainians also experienced during World War II when they were drafted to the Soviet army. But currently, for Ukrainians, this is really, I would say, a painful and ambiguous topic, because so many people from ethnic minorities fight against Ukrainians and kill Ukrainians, that it leads to this ambiguous treatment, that they also are enemies, but at the same time they are imprisoned peoples or nations inside Russia. So from Ukrainian perspective, it seems it's time to start some armed resistance inside Russia. Otherwise, it's hard to help those very indigenous peoples. So it's just a remark. Maybe you have something to comment about it.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of nonviolent resistance, not when it comes to open warfare, of course. When Russia attacks you, you need to resist. But when it comes to the regions, and waging some struggle against Moscow, yeah, I'm just a true believer in nonviolent protests. And I think, there is no possibility for success, and for successful resistance, no matter what kind it will be, until we, inform the people and kind of change their minds, as going back to what I said previously. And that's just an enormous, burden, an enormous amount of work that a lot of indigenous activists from Russia are doing right now. And, I'm very grateful, because they continuously, Kremlin is shutting down, YouTube, et cetera, but those people, they keep finding ways, to, including, to show what Russian army is doing in Ukraine. They send it through like WhatsApp groups, they try to inform people and wage kind of a counter information warfare, and that's an enormous amount of work. So I really hope they succeed, because I think that's the first step to changing something.
Okay, and maybe as a concluding question, a general one, how would you compare this Russian model of exploitation or colonialism of these indigenous people with the past Western colonialism? Because in the West, it's often there is a resistance to perception of Russia as an empire. So, what do you think here?
Yeah, I mean, I must say, I don't know who invented this. That there's this I know popular concept in the West that empire, is only an empire if it captures territories, seas away. But well, Russia is still an empire, even though it's on one landmass, that it managed to build its state. I mean, in this interview alone, we've discussed so many tactics that we're talking about it in context of Russia, but they're so, tried and tested by other colonial empires. Using its subjects in the war, from Great Britain to France, everyone did that, again, economic exploitation, it's absolutely the same with Russia, just coming in, taking the resources, leaving nothing for indigenous populations. Western empires have done that for centuries, and Russia is doing the same thing with taking natural resources from the republics, completely disregarding that it's indigenous lands. And profiting off of it, and then using the money to aid its invasion of Ukraine, among others.